We're back. It's StackHunters. I'm Bradley Stalder. Dan Williamson, my co-host for StackHunters tonight. You can follow me on the X Machine at FF Stalder. You can follow Dan at Overhyped Sleeper with no E at the end. Dan, it's been a minute. I'm glad to be back in the saddle. This is great. I'm so excited to be talking best ball and even more announcements, once we get into the meat of it. But Dan, I'm just so glad you held on tight to the Stack Hunters. You did great in my absence. I know Theo and a few others were able to step in too. So thank you for holding down the fort in the Stack Hunters realm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's no problem. My pleasure, and appreciate you holding it down while I've been gone. So it's all good. We just got to help each other out a little bit. But yeah, it's great to be back. It's great to be talking football, and most of all, it's great to be on the same time clock as everybody else. One thing you just don't realize is when you're over on the continent, London and Paris, it's 6-7 hours ahead of pretty much everybody here. So everything that's going on in the evening here is happening at the dead of night over there. So I was doing all these rookie drafts for my Dynasty leagues. It was a pain, let me tell you.
Well, I was sending you text messages at like 2 a.m, and you were like, wait, what time is it? And it was a normal time for Dan, but it was an abnormal time. For those who didn't know, I had a number 5, and baby number 5 joined the Stalder family. So Dan has been holding it down, and Dan's been traveling. So we've been making Stack Hunters happen though in the meantime. So I'm excited to get into the buys or sells post NFL draft. Dan and I have identified some of the biggest risers and fallers, and we're going to decide whether we are buying the new ADP or we are selling this player based on the changes we've observed. All of that and more right after this. All right, Dan, before we get into all the content and everything, the Player Profiler team just a couple weeks ago all converged in Pinckney, Michigan, where we did live draft coverage. And, if you, as the listeners and viewers, missed out on that coverage, it's some of the best content in the entire industry. Live reactions, it was instant analysis, both from an NFL perspective and from a fantasy perspective. You had the likes of Theo Greminger, Josh Larkey, the Podfather himself. You had Alex Dunlap, you had Cody Carpentier, of course, myself, Tyler Knabley, you had Jason Football. You had so many of these great people in one spot. Anna Naduri was there too. You had all of this great analysis, and some of the players that we're going to be talking about tonight are players who were affected by the NFL draft, whether it was very positively or negatively. So, Dan, that's like my common theme in reading through the names of these players, the biggest changers, is just how impactful the NFL draft is on best ball ADP, of course, but also this gives us some information about what the teams believe their biggest needs were and how they would be filled in the draft. So most of these players, I think are affected by the draft. There are a couple questions, that I have, and I'd like to get your take on a few of these players too, but we'll kick it off with Keon Coleman going from 138th overall. He's drafted by the Buffalo Bills, second-round draft capital, rises all the way to 75.5. We're talking like a 60 spot, a 5-round jump, 45% increase. Dan Williamson, are you buying this new ADP for Keon Coleman, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills?
I'm probably going to mostly fade Coleman at this price. I do think he'll probably have some decent games and everything, but we're talking about a player who's going to be going in the 7th round here, basically. And that's, to me, it's just a little bit rich because what it sounds like from, what we've heard from the coaching staff is they're planning on using him primarily on the outside, which is fine, but that's kind of the Gabe Davis rule. And we've seen what we've gotten from that. And so, it's just not, at that price, to me, it's just not worth it. They've got a ton of slot guys in Buffalo, so I don't see how Coleman is going to work himself into the slot very often. But I think one of the places he might excel is big slot. But, if he's not going to get the chance to play that, you can't really factor that in. So I'm out at this price. If he slipped a couple more rounds, I'd probably be back in, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I did my initial projections for Keon Coleman, and I also, as part of my projections, put them into a projected best ball value rating, Dan. And yeah, nice. You know me and the best ball value rating. Dan and I have gone back and forth about, how valuable it could be. And so I tried to estimate the standard deviations of the Keon Coleman type in his particular role and what we've seen from that type of player, and also the points per game that we're looking at. And I had him as about player 110, overall. And I think that sounds and feels like the right price and the happy medium between where Keon Coleman was going and where he's going now. So at 75.5, I'm also out on Keon Coleman at that value. But the problem I have, Dan, is maybe we know what Curtis Samuel is. We know he's going to be at maximum a 20% target share type of guy. He's going to get a sprinkling of the rushes. This, I think, signals to us that the bigger buy is Dalton Kincaid, right? That
yes.
the targets are going to go to Kincaid, and that the better value positionally is going to be what he can do. Because yes, Dawson Knox was in there blocking a lot and taking some snaps and getting some touchdowns, etc. But year 2 for Kincaid, this was a signal to us that Buffalo did not trade up, and Coleman doesn't fit that profile of, moving around the formation as much.
Right, exactly. And, the other beneficiary probably is going to be Curtis Samuel. I see him probably still taking on a lot of slot work and also playing some on the outside. So, because they've got Shakir, who's also going to be playing in the slot. So I think Samuel's going to be kind of that chess piece that they can move anywhere. And, so I think he's going to end up having some pretty good value compared to his ADP. I don't know if you have his ADP handy at all, Bradley, but he's outside of pick 100 as far as I know.
You're trying. You got to buy me a little bit more time than that.
All right. Yes, I will. But so anyway, because Samuel has been a wide receiver 2 in the past, and he has had some pretty good some pretty good games where he can score 15 plus. So he's a guy who's going to help you out in best ball several weeks.
Yes.
So
Curtis Samuel 100.5.
Oh, that was almost right on. So, yeah, 100.5, that's I think that's a fair price for him.
Yes.
So, yeah, he's the guy I'd be buying in that offense other than Kincaid.
So, the next player that had the biggest jump, Ezekiel Elliott, jumps from 206 to 127.8, a 37.9% jump. Almost 80 spots in ADP. We're talking 6-7 rounds of shifting. And, you put it in the best ball value rating. Where does Ezekiel Elliott land? For me, he's player 105. And I think that we can still, in my opinion, buy Ezekiel Elliott. They've not brought in anyone else. It's Rico Dowdle. Zeke knows the offense. He knows Dak. There's a lot of trust there. Jerry's not saying Zeke who. And instead, the Dallas Cowboys are actually, I think, in a position where they may lean very heavily on Ezekiel Elliott. There's not a lot of playmakers on this team. Sure, Jake Ferguson has had his big moments, but it's CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks. Look, Jason Football loves Ryan Flournoy, but I think it's going to be a lot of Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield here in 2024. They're just going to ride him. What else do they have? Yeah,
and that's that last question you asked. What else do they have? That's a question that always makes me really, really nervous because I strongly think that there's a very good chance that the Cowboys starting running back isn't on the roster yet. So, and because there's always a running back or two that ends up getting cut loose or is available for trade for pretty cheap or, things like that. So,
Dan's been listening to the aggregators, that have said, Najee Harris might get traded to the Cowboys.
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy that particular rumor, but so the specifics I think might not be there, but the direction of it is right. I mean, that's kind of, I think, where the Cowboys might end up. So this is not a bad spot though for Zeke, just because of the fact that even though he's a little bit dust as a runner, he's still a very good pass protector. He can still catch the ball. He doesn't do a lot with it after he's caught it, but he's still a good goal line runner. He can still do some things that can help an offense and can score points for us in fantasy football. When you're talking about, basically somebody who's going after the 10th round, this is a fine spot to take a flyer on him. I don't really think he's going to help you, and he could end up, or I don't think he's going to really hurt you. He could end up helping you.
He could end up helping you, and I think that this is, as I said, a price that I'm okay paying for Ezekiel Elliott, and sometimes the ADPs don't catch up very quickly, and there is the sentiment of exactly what you articulated earlier, that he might get replaced, and that continues to keep at least a ceiling, on his ADP. So, Ezekiel Elliott at this point, with 50% of the rushes, we saw he was still productive for New England, and he was the reason why Ramondre Stevenson, frankly, didn't explode. He was just a thorn in his side for most of the season until Ramondre went down with the injury. So I am not afraid of Ezekiel Elliott at this point. I'll get a little bit of exposure, but it's also in the the 120s where there's a lot of other interesting and hotter and flashier players where I do want a little bit of Zeke, but I'm not saying he is an auto click at that spot. I do like the value, but he's not an auto click.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And to clarify my point, I don't think Zeke is necessarily getting replaced. I think he'll probably be on the team all year, and he'll probably have a role all year. I just think that they're not going to have Rico Dowdle most likely be the 1B in that committee. I think they might rather Zeke be the 1B, and if they can find somebody who can be the 1A, do it that way. Or, it might even be closer to a 50-50 with somebody.
I love it. All right, we'll keep moving to the wide receiver position as the biggest riser among the second biggest wide receiver riser, third highest in terms of relative percent increase. Pre-draft, Xavier Worthy was ADP 94, and for a variety of reasons, he has jumped up to ADP 59.9, a 36.3% increase in his ADP. Obviously, gets the first-round draft capital on the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs have been through a little bit this offseason. Rashee Rice continues to be in the headlines. Travis Kelce is not getting any younger and continues to date a billionaire. So there's a lot to love about Xavier Worthy in terms of his ADP, but is 60 too high? Dan, are you buying or selling Xavier Worthy at 59.9?
Man, that is nosebleed territory right there. That is extremely high, I think. Because the thing is, you can say what you want about Kelce, but they still use him. They've still got Marquise Brown. They're still going to use backs in the passing game. They still run a lot through Pacheco. Mahomes is definitely the straw that stirs the drink. Worthy has that kind of potential, but he's also a rookie. It may take him a few games to get up to speed, and then maybe by that time Rashee Rice is back. So there's, I would, if I knew Rashee Rice wasn't going to be playing all year long or something like that, I would take Worthy just on the speculation that by the end of the year he's starting to crush like Rice did at the end of last year. but I'm not sure that's a great bet. I'm not going to be totally out on Worthy. I'm going to have some shares. A guy with that kind of speed and with the track record that he had at Texas, paired up with Patrick Mahomes, you can't totally fade that. But I'm not going to be overweight on him.
Yeah, he's a player I put into the projected best ball value rating as player 115, and unfortunately, like, he's the type of play. Have we not learned our lesson about rookie Kansas City wide receivers? Like, we've seen this from Rashee Rice. It was a slow start for the first half of the season. And so while Rice did crush for you at the end of the year, like, how many weeks did he bust for you when you were drafting him very high, and now it's even more expensive? Same thing with Sky Moore. Did we not learn our lesson from a couple years ago that it takes time for these Kansas City wide receivers to get acclimated and learn the playbook, to gain trust? Sure, Rashee Rice was able to maintain his efficiency. His yards per route run and PFF receiving grades continued to be very high throughout the season, even with increased snaps. But we weren't able to get full season. You need pretty full season production for it to pay off end of round 5 ADP. And yes, we love the landing spot on Kansas City. We love that the Rashee Rice headlines may make opportunity for Xavier Worthy, but you mentioned Hollywood Brown is always a 22 to 25% target share type of player. Travis Kelce, yes, he may be in the twilight of his career, but he still commands a lot of targets. So I think Xavier Worthy is a fade for this ADP as well, Dan.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And now, to be clear, putting on my Dynasty hat for just a second, Worthy is, I think, the best prospect that Kansas City has drafted at wide receiver in many years.
Since Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, since Tyreek Hill for sure. And probably even a better prospect than Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, I don't think, was a particularly great prospect. I think Worthy's a very good prospect. So, I'm encouraged about that. But I'm just not sure how much of that we're going to see this year. Next year, I expect, if things go well this year, Worthy's going to be like a second, third round pick, and we'll probably all be buying him. So,
yes, he will be what Rashee Rice is this year, and
right.
Xavier Worthy, a better prospect than Rice was. There were a lot of questions about Rashee Rice throughout last year's process, and he didn't, perform for us at the beginning of the year. Had nice efficiency metrics, but wasn't getting us the fantasy points until near the end. So we'll continue to monitor this situation, but we don't want to take zeros of Xavier Worthy. You want to get a little bit with your Patrick Mahomes stacks, but we're not going to go hog wild, and we're not necessarily buying full on this 60 ADP. Well, speaking of Dynasty hats, we have a message from the Podfather about our Dynasty Deluxe.
This episode is brought to you by Player Profiler, the Dynasty Deluxe package. The rankings are the best in the industry. It includes strategy mode, where you can say, hey, change the rankings to be win now. Oh, change the rankings to be productive struggle. There's also a draft planner to help you strategize where you should take players, because the draft planner also includes ADP. There's a trade finder where we look up on My Fantasy League and we see trades that are done, including a particular player. Then there's a trade analyzer where you can plug in draft picks, players, and we assign a lifetime value to draft picks out 5 years. The best thing about our trade analyzer, it can't be gamed with volume. And there's mock draft data to see right now what's the market for player X versus player Y, including in the fall when very few mock drafts are happening. And our Dynasty Guide, the Dynasty Dominator, would cost you $10 on Amazon, but you get it for free with Dynasty Deluxe, and you get our Rookie Guide for free, a $25 value. So you get all of that for $45. I mean, it's a great deal.
It is a great deal. The Dynasty Deluxe package. Make sure you guys are checking that out on playerprofiler.com. Dynasty Deluxe. You love to see it. And a lot of our Dynasty drafts are... We're looking at the end of the first round, and we're seeing Ladd McConkey getting clicked a lot. At least I have, Dan. I've seen him clicked a lot at the 110, 111, 112, 201, around that 1-2 turn, or I don't know if it's a turn, the reset of the rookie drafts. I've seen him a lot at the end of the first, beginning of the second, and he rose 40 spots in the from pre-draft NFL draft to right now, a 35% increase in ADP relative to his previous draft position. Are you buying or selling Ladd McConkey on the LA Chargers?
Yeah, this one's a tough buy as well for me, just because of the fact that we're talking about a rookie here, and one that he did great every time he was on the field, but struggled to get on the field a lot with Georgia. Some of that was due to injury. Some of that was due to the fact that they just had so many other good receivers. But we're talking about an offense that's going to be very low passing volume, probably a very slow offense as well. So they're just not going to be running as many plays. There's just, there's not a lot of gasoline in the tank for McConkey to run on here. And he's a rookie, so he's probably going to take a few games to acclimate. Unless I see that, he's totally tearing up training camp. This is going to be a tough number for me. I feel like he should be more like pick 90, something like that.
Interesting. So I put him into the best ball value rating projections, and he came out at 75. So this was about the right spot, I felt like, for Ladd McConkey. I'm not as bullish as our friend Theo Greminger. Theo has gone on the record saying that he expects Ladd McConkey to get 140 targets in year one. I'm not quite at 140 targets. I'm at 119. But I think that it's going to be very clear that McConkey is the best wide receiver on the team, and that's going to be very quick. We look at Josh Palmer. He's just a guy. Quentin Johnson is a bust. DJ Chark, who just signed this past week, I think is a situational deep threat who can have some nice games in best ball. But we're not going to go out of our way to say, DJ Chark is preventing Ladd McConkey. This is a player who did really well in college. Reason why he got the draft capital he did. And I think that it's going to be very clear very quickly that he's the number one go-to option for a Justin Herbert quarterback who has a history of hyper-targeting his lead wide receivers, whether it has been Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. We've seen a hyper-targeting of these good players. And I just think that it's a lack of confidence in the other wide receiver options. It's going to be very quick. What is it? Going to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks? We find out Ladd McConkey is going to get 8 targets a game.
Yep, and if he does get to 120, I think you're probably right there, Bradley. I think he's probably going to be closer to the 90 to 100 target range. That's kind of where my gut math is right now. I haven't done a complete breakdown like you have, but I think the other receivers around him are going to be just good enough that he's going to have to really get out there and earn those targets. It's not going to be just like handed to him. So I worry a little bit about just the sheer volume, but I think if he does get the volume, that's going to be good. The other thing I worry about is what kind of a blocker is he, because if he's he's going to need to be a good run blocker to be on the field a lot. So be paying attention to that in training camp as well.
Yeah, the blocking is going to be really key for a player like McConkey because we know how important that is to the Jim Harbaugh offense. We're going to project a lot of rushing and a significant decrease in both pace of play and passing volume, pass percentage for a player for the entire Chargers offense. But that means increases for players like Kimani Vidal or Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. And so pulling up Ladd McConkey's blocking, here we go, per PFF, a 60 PFF blocking grade from last year. Run blocking grade was much better in 2022 and 2021 for Georgia as well. So probably smaller sample size. We'll have to monitor how Harbaugh views him because, sure, he may maybe he was injured and that's why he couldn't block well. Maybe he was only asked to do certain assignments. There are questions that we have, but at least he has in previous seasons looked good per PFF's run blocking. So we'll see if he can translate to the NFL in that category. Here's a surprise, Dan, and I can't get a read on it quite very much. Chris Olave is the 5th highest riser in terms of relative ADP increase, goes from 24 to 18.7, 22% increase. The Saints really don't add anyone of note. Bub Means, the wide receiver. Other than that, there wasn't much added to this New Orleans offense. Is that just the lack of additions, the increase in confidence, or just other players in the second round that have fallen out of favor that you think has led to the Chris Olave movement from the end of the second round to the mid-second round?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, he's moving up by default, but I think, most of it is just the fact that New Orleans didn't really do anything at wide receiver. So, and I think that there was some speculation beforehand that, this is something that might happen. New Orleans taking somebody to, replace Michael Thomas or something like that. So, largely we're looking at a very similar cast of characters there. And hopefully a more efficient, better offense with the new offensive coordinator. So, I certainly don't mind Olave at this, level. I mean, middle of the second round, end of the second round. In a way, it's not a huge difference. It's just, a different set of, managers are going to get him. The guys on the turn are no longer going to be getting him, and it's guys in the middle that are more likely to be getting him. So, it just kind of changes up builds a little bit, but I'm not scared off of him at this price by any means. What do you think, Bradley?
No, I'm fine with clicking Chris Olave. I'm back in. Last year, I was out on Chris Olave, and it paid off. Olave had his nice floor weeks, but never really exploded. He didn't have a couple big explosion games. And that's what when you're drafting in the first couple rounds, you don't want floor. You want ceiling. You want players to get your 30, 40 point games occasionally. And Chris Olave was not there. But what's changed for Chris Olave? Well, they got a new offensive coordinator. Kubiak is in the house in New Orleans. And so we want to see a little bit more creativity in the play call. Olave, the air yards king, just running these routes, getting targets down the field, but not connecting. And Kubiak has a history of scheming guys open, getting them in good positions to be able to getting players to be able to explode. And so Olave, I think, is clearly getting the targets and the downfield targets, but it's now the touchdowns, and those tend to vary from year to year. And of course, the downfield, is this a catch? Is this not a catch? Olave, things can very much fall the right way for Olave, and he could pay off even first-round draft capital. So the expected fantasy points for a player like Olave, if he even gets close to meeting the expected, look out. This is a first-round type wide receiver, and if any of the targets don't go to Kamara, there's not really another receiving option outside of Olave, Kamara. We're not worried about Juwan Johnson or anything like that.
No, though Juwan Johnson's not a terrible pick at ADP in best ball either. But but that does not disqualify your point one bit. And when the only wide receiver you draft is a guy named Bub, I mean, that's a defensive tackle or an offensive lineman, right? You cannot be named Bub and be a wide receiver. I don't think that's possible. At least not a good one. So we're disqualifying him on name alone.
Bub Means is taking strays from Dan Williamson on the live stream. You love to see it.
If Bub's mom is listening, I'm sorry. I'm sure that's probably a nickname. That's probably not what you named him yourself. But anyway.
We'll finish out the biggest risers with running back Zamir White. He survives the NFL draft. It's just Dylan Laube at running back behind him, and possibly the Amir Abdullah role. The reality is Zamir White handled the between the tackles for the last 4 games, and he did it valiantly with the new head coach Pierce. And Pierce is back. We expect the rock to be run. The other options on offense are good. I would say outside of quarterback, Vegas Raiders have a pretty interesting offense. They've got Devontae Adams, who still showed a massive ceilings last year. You have Brock Bowers. You have Jacoby Myers. Michael Mayer is there. You've got pieces on this offense that are very interesting, but the question is, how badly is quarterback going to hamstring this offense? And it could be very bad. Zamir White could keep the floor pretty high, but even at 80, I like Zamir White, the clicks that happened there. I'm not worried about the Raiders bringing in another player. So, Zamir White, I think, is a good click at 79.3, even with the increase.
Now, Bradley, you weren't throwing shade at my boy Minshew, were you? Did you just throw shade at Minshew right now?
Is it Minshew or Aiden O'Connell?
I think it'll be Minshew. I think Minshew gives him a level of competence, and he's a little bit of a gunslinger as well. So I think that he's going to be able to keep that offense afloat pretty well. But that does not, again, disqualify anything you said about Zamir White. I'm definitely in on him at this ADP. The only thing that was holding his ADP down before was everybody was so paranoid that they were going to take a running back or two in the draft and take them in the second or third round.
Right.
That doesn't happen, and all of a sudden, as you said, there's just not that much really quality competition there. Zamir White did look good in his 4 games.
Just Alexander Madison, and we know what he is.
Yes, those of us in Minnesota really know what he is. What do you? And he has a lot of good things, but what he is not is a feature back. We know that for sure. So, Zamir White, I think it's wheels up at ADP of 79. I'd probably even take him higher than that if I needed to.
I'm buying at that ADP. There's some commenters White ran a lot because they had a bad quarterback in games that didn't matter. Pumping the ADP. I'm going to let other people pump the ADP. I'm just going to take Zamir White at ADP. I'm fine with that.
Right.
Because at that point, at 80 overall, you've got your 6 best players. At that point, 6 or 7 best players, and you're taking maybe Zamir White is your second or third running back. Sure, great. You'll hammer the rest of running back the rest of the draft, and if Zamir White hits, you've got a solid RB2, maybe back end RB1. But if he doesn't hit, it's not cratering your team. You obviously you want, a good player at, 80 overall, but it's not. We've seen winning best ball teams survive busts in round 3, busts in round 5, busts in round 8, and so I'm not worried about taking shots on a player like Zamir White at that price tag.
Yeah, and to Klepter's point, who you just put up his post. He says, I would slow down pumping up Zamir White's ADP. They drafted Lobb to be the next Eckler. And while that's a fair point, that probably is why they drafted Lobb. I think we have to realize how rare and unusual it is for players like Eckler to, actually appear and succeed. It's not anything that you can just say as a given. Even though as a dynasty player, I like Lobb. I've been taking some Lobb in my rookie drafts and everything else. I think he's a great dart throw, but he is a dart throw. If he was really that good, we'd be taking him in the first, second, third rounds of rookie drafts instead of the fourth and fifth or sixth rounds. So, I think it's a little bit too soon to to anoint Lobb.
Crown him.
Anything. Yes, let's let things play out. Last year everybody was talking about Zach Evans, being the guy who was behind, Akers, and turns out some guy named Kyren Williams, right? So, we don't always know as much as we think we know, and the best thing to do at this time of year is to really recognize that, you don't want to be so unconfident that you are afraid to make moves and afraid to, pick players and so forth like that. But also you have to have a healthy dose of humility that, hey, this could be wrong. When you're picking for a particular best ball team, you want to pick as if every pick is going to be right. You don't want to sit there and put the double condom on or anything like that. You want to, you want to make those picks as if you're right. But on the other hand, when you're talking about your whole portfolio, you don't want to get too heavy on guys unless you have a reason to really be confident. Now, if Klepter is super confident about Lob, he should have a portfolio that's heavy on Lob. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think in general you want to go that heavy until you start seeing some evidence at the NFL level in training camp, etc. That hey, this guy is going to work out that well.
Yeah, we do need to be, a little bit hesitant of these late draft capital running backs who, maybe it is that the Raiders do trust Alexander Mattison to handle third down. Even if it's not in his profile, it comes down to who do the coaches trust in terms of opportunity. And they like Lob, maybe they like Madison. Maybe there's someone else, that they'll bring in later on. Maybe there's an undrafted free agent that stems up and comes out. But nevertheless, we this was a good discussion about Zamir White. I like that. We've got to bust the bubble though and go down to the fallers. The biggest fallers. We're going to talk about 6 of them. The biggest faller since the draft is Kyren Williams, and he drops from 13 to 20.6. So at that 1-2 turn to mid-end of round 2, he's dropped 58.5% of his previous ADP. And so, Matt Kelly was celebrating. He was cheering. He was hooting and hollering in the Pinckney house. Dan, I don't know if you heard him all the way in Minnesota, but you might have.
Well, I was all the way in London at that point.
Oh,
so.
Yeah, you were maybe across the pond. Dan Williamson can attest to the fact that he could hear the podfather, Matt Kelly, celebrating his call of Kyren Williams getting nuked. Now, to be fair, Dan, my initial reaction was Kyren Williams becomes like a round 7 guy. And that was just, maybe it was a little bit of an overreaction, but I do think that because of the redundant skill sets that Blake Corum and Kyren Williams has, that yes, Kyren will get the first crack at it. He's deserved it. He's obviously a high producer, but the efficiency metrics are simply not good. So, will Kyren hold on to it for the majority of the season? By week 18, Kyren Williams still the starter, like 70% of carries, 50%. Like, I don't have that kind of confidence that Kyren Williams is going to last the whole season. Blake Corum was really good at the University of Michigan. His rushing grade was extremely high. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He is a pro caliber type of running back. And this is what Sean McVay wants in his running backs. He wants them to, Kyren Williams is a Notre Dame product, right? These are elite programs with pedigrees for preparing for the NFL. And that's what he wants in terms of who he's putting out on the field, who he can trust. And Kyren Williams, yes, he's earned the trust, but I think Blake Corum is also in a place where he'll be quick to earn the trust of Sean McVay. So I'm going to let Kyren continue to plateau. Like, I want to see him plateau before I buy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know if, the movement is done on him. I don't think that 20.6 is as cheap as he's going to go. So for that reason, I'm probably the same as you, Bradley. I'm just not buying at this point, because there's going to be some times where we hear really good news about Corum or really bad news about Kyren Williams or whatever. Corum's going to make a big play in training camp and it's going to be all over X, or you're going to have, even better in a preseason game, and he makes a 50-yard run or something like that for a touchdown, or an incredible catch or something.
Yes.
Things are going to happen. And, there's going to be a lot, I think probably a little bit of seesaw movement on Corum and Kyren. And I think the best way to play it is, when Kyren's kind of on a dip, you buy. When Corum's on a dip, you buy. And when they're, rising or peaking, you just hold off and buy the other one because the other one's probably on a dip at that point.
Yeah, so Kyren Williams, I did the initial, best ball value rating and projections and all that. Kyren Williams ends up coming in at player 56 for me. And so maybe I get into round 4, but I think that's it feels low, but that's my projection eventually for Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, that Kyren's going to handle first and second down, maybe a little bit more of the touchdowns, and then you're looking at Blake Corum also between the 20s, get some third down work. But Kyren is also capable in the passing game. He's trustworthy, even if he's not efficient. And so that's something we need to keep in mind is sure, Kyren is not efficient. Sure, Kyren is not a combine star, but he's trusted by the coaching staff. And so it's going to take a while for him to lose out majority. So I still have Kyren over Blake Corum significantly, but I still think the price needs to bottom out a little bit more for Kyren.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but Kyren's one of those really dangerous players because the thing is he has shown us what he can do. We've seen that these 25-point games are within his range of outcomes, and Corum being there isn't necessarily going to change that. We think there's a very good chance that it will, but again, we don't know. Corum may struggle in ways that we can't understand. He may get injured. A lot of things may happen, and so there are still ways that Kyren can definitely outperform an ADP of even 20.6. Even with Corum in the building. So, when you have somebody who's shown that they have that ceiling of, a top 3-4 running back, you probably don't want to be completely without him in your portfolio.
Agreed. Kyren Williams was the RB2 in terms of best ball value rating last year. So we've seen that ceiling. It was only Christian McCaffrey who was better in terms of what they were offering you in the best ball streets. So Dan is right. We can't ignore the type of ceiling that Kyren can offer, and probably going to offer for the first couple weeks of the season at least. We're pretty set on that. And Blake Corum, for what it's worth, is my 80th overall player in the projections. So, probably a little lower than consensus on Kyren, a little higher than Blake Corum. We want the Rams backfield, though. We do not want to not be exposed to it is what we want to get to. So, whether you are Team Blake, Team Kyren, I don't care. Get some Rams on your Rams running backs on your best ball team.
Yep, definitely.
All right, Dan, we got to rip the Band-Aid off. Rashee Rice dropping from 46th to 69.9, a 51.9% decrease in his ADP. He is now, look, I'm in the DK streets. I've been there. Rashee Rice has fallen even further outside of Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy. It's been a yin-yang sort of deal where those guys have gone up because he's gone down, but now it's clearly Worthy and Hollywood over Rice in the ADP streets. Are we just waiting for more information? At what point does it not make sense to draft Rashee Rice?
Yeah, I think we are waiting for more information. I mean, I think it's a little bit, the news we got on Monday is a little bit problematic about the incident in the nightclub, though we haven't really heard much more since. I don't know how big of a deal that is. I've heard some things about, there was actually only a verbal altercation, no physical altercation. Maybe that's true. But the guy is clearly not a very good decision maker. So, we've got some concerns there, and maybe he can turn it around like Tyreek Hill. But most of the time, when we see guys who continue to or have a habit of making poor decisions, that pattern continues. I mean, by the time you hit the age of Rashee Rice, your personality is basically set. And if you have a tendency towards poor decision making, it's tough to get out of that. Not everybody is able to do that. So, I'm personally probably off him at 69. I'd say maybe around 80, 85, because I think he's going to get a suspension of some sort. He's going to miss, I think, I'm going to say 6 games at least, could be 10. If it's 6, then maybe 80, 85, something like that, because you're getting him for the back half of the season where things really count. But I'm going to be underweight on him no matter what. So
I put him in the best ball value rating projections, and he comes out at player 64, and so he was a bad value at his ADP. He was one of the players I was pounding the table in the pre-draft process. Do not be drafting Rashee Rice. And that was before all of the high-speed chases and the debacles and blah, blah, blah. I was just saying, do not draft Rashee Rice. And, now you put him in the projections and you see, okay, yes, add Xavier Worthy in there, keep Travis Kelce in there. Isaiah Pacheco is going to get his. Hollywood Brown shows up. Like, there are other players who can step in a meaningful way, to be a good contributor. And Rashee Rice, while he's good, is not great enough to be the player that you wait out for, in terms of that. And so I agree with you in terms of clarity. We should be waiting a little bit more. And so Rashee Rice, a player that if he gets in the 70s, in the 80s, like, it's going to be harder for me to not click him, especially if I've gone Mahomes and then you get one of the Kansas City wide receivers earlier. Like, to double tap that feels a little cheap, because you either one or two of them for sure throughout the season. And we know what Rice was able to do on the field last year, and it was be a very efficient player moving around the formation. We liked Rashee Rice, but not loved him last year. Took a while for him to get going. So Rashee Rice at 70, I want to see if we can, continue to take discounts on him. I want to see him fall a little more.
Fair enough. And, Sweater Stacker, he's asking why a 6-game suspension. I'm not going to sit here and get into trying to decide how many games he should or shouldn't get, or how many games Kamara should or shouldn't have gotten. That's way above my pay grade. I'm not paid to make those decisions. My opinion on them isn't even really important. It's more about what I think the NFL is likely to do. And the optics on this are really, really bad. And I think that and especially, with how he handled it, I think it's just very likely that it's going to be at least 6. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, typically it depends on how much publicity and what type of videos exist, right? Yep. TMZ has some videos, but, it just depends on what gets out, frankly. The NFL is more focused on their perception than they are about necessarily, doing the right thing. But nevertheless, we'll continue moving forward. Wide receiver Rome Odunze drops from 44 overall to 66 overall, 51% drop. He goes to Chicago. We were worried about this landing spot, at least for year one, because of Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, who had a combined 58% target share last year. And then you add Rome Odunze to the mix. Plus, you've got Cole Kmet, who was a respectable tight end producer. It's going to be hard for me to justify drafting Rome Odunze at that price. I do want a little bit of it because the Caleb stacks and like how Rome could take over the second half of the season, but it's going to be hard to push out 2 mega target share earners in terms of Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, I don't care about their ages. They're target gobblers, and they're gonna get theirs. So Rome Odunze, it's hard for me to buy that even at 66.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to draw a comparison with the Seattle offense and the situation last year where you had DK Metcalf and Lockett, and then you had Jackson Smith and Jigba in there, and we saw how JSN did. Now you move that offensive coordinator over to the Bears, and we have a very similar situation. We've got, two great wide receivers, and here comes Rome Odunze, a very highly regarded rookie. I just think, as much as we want, as much as I believe in Odunze's talent, as much as I want him to get off to a fast start, I just can't buy him at ADP here.
Yeah, we can't do it. So I pulled up the projections. Rome Odunze is my player 127.
Yeah.
So round 10, round 11. Yikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I'll have very much Odunze at all.
Yeah, yikes. Look, I love the prospect, love the talent, drafting him in some of my rookie drafts, but I am not in the short term in on Rome Odunze. So there you go. We'll keep her moving here. Michael Mayer gets nuked. Brock Bowers shows up in the first round. 156 drops all the way to 213, a 37% drop. Michael Mayer's free virtually now in drafts. I don't mind him as a late round stab, but I have so much Michael Mayer, Dan. This is not good for my pre-NFL draft teams that were in on the Michael Mayer year 2 breakout.
Yeah, I have a good amount of the pre-draft Michael Mayer as well. Because it was a great story, a great thesis. It just didn't work out the way that we hoped it would. There was always the possibility that something was going to happen here, and sure enough, something did happen. So that something's Brock Bowers, but We have seen rookie tight ends fail to ignite in their first season, so there's not 0% hope for Mayer, but I think with all the with everything else that's going on with Oakland, I just have a hard time seeing Mayer as being a big piece of this offense, really, no matter how things break out, and so I just don't see the big games coming. I mean, if you're going super late at tight end and you're going to do like 3 or 4 tight ends really late, he could fit into a strategy like that. But other than that, I really don't have too much interest.
Yeah. Oh, that hurts my soul. It hurts my soul. The Notre Dame, cheer for old Notre Dame at poor Michael Mayer. Come on, bud. All right, we got to keep her moving. We've got a couple minutes left here in StackHunters. We got 2 more players we want to touch on. The second running back in terms of falling, Braylon Allen falls from 160 to 210. And, they get Isaiah Davis there. Izzy Abanikanda there. You've got Breece Hall, of course, as the RB1. Braylon Allen, we were hoping would have landed in New York as the RB2, but it doesn't feel, the vibes are not great around Braylon Allen. Vibes-based drafting is leading to him falling near the end of our fantasy drafts, and the landing spot isn't great. He didn't test the combine. There were just a lot of questions, a lot of issues that were not answered by Braylon Allen in the pre-draft process, and that ambiguity and concern continued with this landing spot and this draft capital. So Braylon Allen, not a player that we're interested in. At least I'm not. Dan, it's been hard for me to even look at Braylon Allen in the rookie dynasty drafts, much less in best ball.
Yeah, it's a tough scene for him, no doubt about it. As you said, it's just been one negative story after another for Allen. He was a guy that when we first started looking at rookies in January, I was actually thinking I would be pretty high on him, and And, as more and more information came in, I kept having to drop him down. And I was still kind of had a little bit of hope for him until he went as late as he did to the Jets. And then it was just like, okay, you've really got to have a Breece Hall injury for him to pay off in any meaningful way. I guess you can hope that he becomes the goal line back or something like that. And, they don't use Hall around the goal line as much or something. But, that or a Breece Hall injury are really his only path to success. So, he's not somebody who I think is going to force any sort of a timeshare here at all.
All right, Dan, last player we'll hit on is Christian McCaffrey. Y'all are like, wait a minute. Christian McCaffrey is one of the biggest fallers in terms of ADP. Yes, Dan. Yes. He falls from number 1 overall to number 1.3. And when I shared this with Dan this morning, I was like, Dan, we need to talk about this. And he was like, Bradley, I nearly spit out my coffee. Why is Christian McCaffrey on this list? And it was less about, oh, he's a faller. Oh, he is blah, 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 And so don't freak out. He fell from 1 to 1.3. But it begs the question, how often are people clicking not Christian McCaffrey 101? Like, who are the viable options to be drafted 101 over McCaffrey outside of the reason I just want different exposure to different players? Like, is there a path? Who has the pathway to outscore Christian McCaffrey this year? It's only got to be a couple players, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically the reason why you don't click on McCaffrey at 101 is because you say, it's super, super extremely rare for a running back to finish 101, to finish first twice in a row. It's the odds are far greater that something's going to happen to McCaffrey than that he's going to be able to repeat exactly his season. But then you have to say, okay, well, who do you put in there then? And as far as running back goes, I think Breece Hall is really the only person that you could put in there if you're going to go with a running back at 101. Bijan Robinson, maybe. I have a hard time seeing anybody else really being in that conversation. I think it's more likely that if you don't take McCaffrey number 1, it's because you really have conviction about a CeeDee Lamb or a Justin Jefferson or a Tyreek Hill or somebody like that. Insert your favorite wide receiver here. So you can come up with other people to take, but when you're trying to set your exposures, you really can't count on not getting McCaffrey anywhere other than 101. So when you have the opportunities to take him, you almost have to have him if you want to have even exposure to him. If you're okay being underexposed to McCaffrey, then you can start taking other players there. Or if you really look into a lot of 101s, then you can start taking other players there. But otherwise, yeah, I'm going to continue to just click on McCaffrey and at least try to stay even with the field on him. And I wouldn't mind being a little bit overweight if I could. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to not click McCaffrey just with the way he can win you your league. We did see, though, last year in the Best Ball Mania tournament, it was Stephon Diggs in round 1 and Josh Allen in round 2. It's okay that Diggs didn't pay off, fully. He ended up being like wide receiver 17 in Best Ball value rating, but Josh Allen absolutely crushed in round 2. He was the quarterback 1 by far, and I would argue Josh Allen should be in the first round consideration. I don't care that y'all are, believing that Stephon Diggs made Josh Allen. No, maybe this is a hot take, but I think Josh Allen is, the only quarterback who deserves to be first or even second round draft capital in our best ball streets. So come at me, y'all. I don't think he's 101 at all. I think that's pretty set. But what my point is ultimately that it wasn't a Christian McCaffrey team, despite the fact that McCaffrey was the best player individually. It was about what you can get coming on the way back. So maybe you'll luck into a couple 102s, 103s Christian McCaffrey if there are some drafters who are taking other players. But the McCaffrey's most often going as the 101. He's the consensus right now. All right, Dan, any last thoughts before we say sayonara for the night?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I'm definitely excited to be drafting again. That little layoff as the pre-draft contest ended. It's hard. It's hard to just kind of have those few days of no drafting and just watching the draft. But
very true.
And there was actually no watching of the draft for me over in London.
Oh no!
Oh yeah. Because everything was happening again, and 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and of course it was the most exciting draft that has happened in several years, and I'm not seeing any of it live, so that part was tough. But definitely, guys, get out there. Right now, there's I think great values in the streets wherever you're doing your best ball drafting, because ADPs have yet to settle. If you've got the right take on a guy, and there are going to be some players who rise a lot, and if you're in on them at lower prices, that's going to make it worthwhile. So keep in mind, Toyo won the FFPC best ball with a team that was drafted the weekend after the NFL draft last year. So,
yes,
there is value there, and it is worth drafting right now, even though the rooms tend to be a little sharper right now than what they're going to be in August. Still worthwhile because of the values you can get, due to ADPs changing. So get out there and get drafting.
On behalf of Dan, I'm Bradley. Make sure you're following Dan on the X Machine at Overhyped Sleeper. I'm Bradley Stalder at FF Stalder on the X Machine. Make sure you guys are smashing the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Really appreciate it. Until next time, good luck in the best ball streets, everybody.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.